Alors bonjour tout le monde, salam alaikum. Je m'appelle Stephen Brown et je suis le PDG du Conseil national des musulmans canadiens, ou le CNMC. Je suis ici avec mes collègues de l'Association canadienne des libertés civiles et Fatima Anvari pour annoncer notre appel visant à faire invalider la loi 21 du Québec. Une loi enracinée dans la discrimination qui représente l'une des plus grandes menaces des droits fondamentaux des Canadiennes et des Canadiens depuis plus d'une génération. Et je ne dis pas ça à la légère, je parle d'expérience. En tant que Noir canadien de 6e génération, je n'ai besoin de remonter qu'à une génération pour me rappeler une époque où les personnes qui nous ressemblaient étaient exclues des opportunités éducatives et professionnelles, et ce, en raison de leur apparence. Comme peuple, on pensait avoir évolué au-delà de ce type de discrimination sociale. Mais force est de constater que malheureusement, ce n'est pas le cas. L'adoption de la loi 21, il y a 5 ans, a créé un réel déchirement au sein de notre société. Parce que contrairement à ce que soutient le gouvernement Legault, cette loi discriminatoire n'en fait que fragiliser notre société en nous appauvrissant et en exacerbant les tensions sociales. Des milliers de Québécois et Québécoises de tout horizon souffrent désormais des conséquences de la loi 21. Je pense à des personnes comme Fatima Anvari, l'enseignante à ACLC qui a perdu son emploi, ou un membre de ma propre famille qui a passé des années à étudier pour ensuite se voir refuser de pratiquer sa profession d'enseignante. Et je pense aux personnes qui ont dû partir de Québec pour trouver de nouveaux emplois, ce qui a séparé leur famille. Nous savons également que les cas de discrimination et de violence, ainsi que les sentiments d'aliénation et de peur ont augmenté à cause de cette loi, surtout en ce qui concerne les femmes musulmanes du Québec. Le juge de première instance, Marc-André Blanchard, a eu raison de qualifier la loi 21 de cruelle et déshumanisante par celles et ceux qui sont directement visés. Mais si vous pensez que vous êtes à l'abri des impacts négatifs de cette loi parce qu'elle ne vous cible pas directement, j'ai des nouvelles pour vous. Les dommages de cette loi se font sentir partout au pays et au cœur de notre démocratie libérale. Parce que quand le gouvernement Legault a utilisé la clause dérogatoire de la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés pour volontairement enlever des droits à ses propres citoyens, et ce, en fonction de leur identité, le gouvernement Legault a créé un précédent terrible. Un précédent permettant aux politiciens de priver les Canadiennes et les Canadiens de tout horizon de leurs droits et libertés les plus fondamentaux, et ce simplement parce que ça pourrait être populaire ou politiquement opportun. Il est très important pour les Canadiennes et les Canadiens de comprendre à quel point nos droits et nos libertés sont désormais compromis à cause de l'utilisation de la clause dérogatoire dans ce contexte. La liberté de conscience, la liberté de religion, la liberté d'association et d'expression, les protections contre les fouilles et les saisies illégales, les châtiments cruels et inusités et même l'habeas corpus. Pour n'en nommer que quelques-uns, la liste est longue. Cette atteinte à nos libertés ne sont pas simplement de l'ordre théorique, c'est notre réalité actuelle. Suivant le précédent établi par le gouvernement Legault, d'autres provinces ont déjà commencé à utiliser la clause non-obstante pour priver la population de ses droits lorsqu'elle estime que cela est politiquement opportun. Ceux-ci ne sont pas des signes d'une société libre. La loi 21 est une loi cruelle et déshumanisante qui porte atteinte à l'un des principes fondamentaux de notre démocratie libérale, la liberté elle-même. Et c'est précisément pourquoi nous sommes ici aujourd'hui à la Cour suprême du Canada pour demander l'annulation de cette loi désastreuse qui instaure la citoyenneté de 2e classe dans notre pays. C'est un effort et l'un, sinon le plus important et le plus conséquent défi juridique de notre génération. Parce qu'elle répond à une question fondamentale. Comme Canadiens, est-ce que nous avons des droits ou est-ce que nous avons des permissions? Les Canadiennes et les Canadiens qui croient en la liberté refusent d'accepter que le Canada soit un pays où les politiciens peuvent nous priver de nos droits où bon leur semble. Nous avons le devoir envers eux qui nous ont précédés, envers nos enfants et envers nous-mêmes, avait à ce que le Canada continue d'être un pays qui prend au sérieux la liberté de ses citoyens. Et la seule façon d'y parvenir, c'est d'envoyer la loi 21 où elle appartient, avec d'autres exemples honteux de discrimination parrainée par l'État dans la poubelle de l'histoire. Hello, my name is Stephen Brown and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I'm here with my colleagues from the CCLA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and Fatima Anvari, to announce our appeal to strike down Quebec's Bill 21, a law rooted in discrimination that represents one of the greatest threats to fundamental rights and freedoms enjoyed by Canadians in over a generation. And I don't say this lightly, and I speak from experience. As a sixth-generation Afro-Canadian, I only need to go back one generation to find a time when people that looked like us were barred from certain educational professions and pursuits simply because of what we look like. As Canadians, we thought that those days of blatant discrimination were behind us. But I'm sad to say that because of Bill 21, we are right back to those dark days. Indeed, the impacts of Bill 21 on the foundation of our social fabric have been wide-ranging and devastating. Contrary to what the government of Quebec pretends, Bill 21 has weakened Quebec society by exacerbating social tensions and impoverishing its citizens. Thousands of Quebecers from all walks of life are now suffering the consequences. I think of people like Fatima Anvari, who lost her job, of people like my own family members, one of my own family members who spent years of her life studying to be a teacher, who's now barred from working in her field, or the families who got split up when people had to move away to find work. Not to mention research demonstrating increases in discrimination, violence, and alienation as a result of this bill, and this is especially true of Muslim women. Indeed, the judge, Marc-André Blanchard, was correct in his assessment that Bill 21 is both cruel and dehumanizing to those directly targeted by it. But if you think that you are spared the negative impacts of this law because it doesn't target you directly, I would invite you to think again. The effects of this law are being felt right across the country and the core of our liberal democracy. By using the notwithstanding clause in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to deliberately discriminate against its own citizens for political gain, the Legault government set the terrible precedent for any legislator in the country to take away the most sacred rights and freedoms of any group of Canadians based on their identity simply because they think it's popular or politically expedient. It is very important for Canadians to understand just how many of our rights are now in jeopardy. Freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of association and expression, protection against unlawful search and seizure, cruel and unusual punishment, and even habeas corpus, just to name a few. And it has to be noted, this isn't just some legal theory. Following the precedent set by the Legault government, other provinces have already started using the notwithstanding clause to take away people's rights when they think it's politically expedient. Those are not the hallmarks of a free society. The fact of the matter is, the evidence could not be clearer. Bill 21 is a cruel and dehumanizing law that works to undermine the core tenets of our liberal democracy, which is liberty itself. And that is exactly why we're here today in front of the Supreme Court of Canada to apply for leave to repeal this terrible law in what is one of, if not the most important and consequential legal challenges of our generation. Because at the end of the day, we as a country need to definitively answer the question, do we as Canadians have rights or do we have permissions? Those of us here today, and all Canadians who value their freedoms, refuse the notion that Canada is a country where politicians can legally take away our rights whenever they feel like it. We owe it to those who came before us, to our children and to ourselves, to ensure that Canada continues to be a country that takes the freedom of its citizens seriously. And the only way to do that is to send Bill 21 to where it belongs, with other shameful examples of state-sponsored discrimination on the trash heap of history. Thank you very much.
right up close to the mic.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Fatima Anvari. I live in Gatineau, Quebec, and I was formerly a teacher in the Western Quebec School Board. Near the end of 2021, I saw myself in a situation where I had to choose between my hijab and teaching, the profession of my dreams. Two parts of my identity that in no way interfere with each other. Such a decision is one that no human, and definitely no Canadian, should ever have to make. After all, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does guarantee it. As teachers, one of the most important parts of our job is to empower each of our students to define their own identities and their roles as humans in the world. And yet, somehow, my grade 3 students watched their teacher lose her job because of the way she chose to exist and define her identity. They were confused, disappointed, and in sheer disbelief. They had questions, the most heartbreaking of which was probably when one of them asked me if it was my choice not to teach them anymore. They became activists. They started writing to politicians and asking for change. During that time, our federal government promised that when it gets to the federal level, to the Supreme Court, that they will intervene. And now I ask, will they answer my students' questions? Will this change? This law does not just affect Muslim women, although it does disproportionately affect Muslim women who wear hijab, but it also does affect our brothers and sisters in various other faiths. But let us not forget that every Canadian, regardless of whether they identify with a faith or cultural background that includes a religious garment, is affected by this bill. My students being a prime example. They learn in school that they have to choose who they want to be, that it is non-negotiable. As long as they're kind to other people, they do not have to change who they are. So what example does that set for them to watch their teacher lose her job for exactly that? For choosing to be who she is. So as difficult as that decision was to make, as difficult as it was to leave my class behind, I knew that I had to choose to stick with my identity and to set that example for my students, because I would not be the teacher that I want to be if I had chosen to remove my hijab. And today, when this appeal is going through, I'm hopeful that all Canadians will hear this and they will ask themselves, what kind of Canada do they want? Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees many rights that we always enjoy as Canadians, that we are always proud of. When do we get to see that become a reality and our charter apply equally to all Canadians? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Harini Sivalingam. I am the Director of the Equality Program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. My pronouns are she and her. We are here today to announce that we will continue to fight to protect rights and freedoms of all of us in Canada through this challenge of Bill 21. Yesterday, our lawyers filed materials to ask Canada's highest court to hear our argument on why Bill 21 is unconstitutional and to play an important role in deciding whether rights and freedoms have any real meaning in our constitutional democracy. For almost 5 years, we have been pursuing this legal battle along with the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and we are hopeful that it will be heard at the Supreme Court of Canada. We filed materials that outlined why this legal challenge to Bill 21 is something that the Supreme Court of Canada must weigh in on. The very disappointing decision by the Quebec Court of Appeal should not and cannot be the last word on this issue. The rights and freedoms that are at stake are too significant to leave these issues unresolved. We hope that the Supreme Court of Canada agrees and will hear this case on its docket in the coming months. We are hopeful that the Supreme Court of Canada will hear this appeal in order to weigh in and settle the significant and pressing national legal issues raised in this case. What is at stake is whether rights and freedoms we have in Canada can be so easily taken away without any judicial oversight. The use of the notwithstanding clause does not legitimately prevent a court from deciding on the constitutionality of this legislation, specifically on whether Bill 21 violates our constitutional structure. Bill 21 is a discriminatory piece of legislation that should not escape judicial scrutiny. From the day that Bill 21 was first passed, almost 5 years ago, CCLA has spoken out about the detrimental impact this legislation will have on our democracy and on our rights and freedoms. When the government of Quebec forced Bill 21 down the throats of Quebecers by invoking the notwithstanding clause to do so, many voiced strong opposition. We heard from municipalities from across Quebec and Canada, in both large centers and small rural communities, who were concerned about the message of exclusion that Bill 21 sent to its communities. We heard from faith leaders from every single faith community about the fears their community members face about religious discrimination and intolerance. We heard from young people who had to choose between entering careers in important public institutions or being able to faithfully practice and display their religious identity. Since its inception, Bill 21 has faced widespread criticism. So let's be clear. Bill 21 discriminates against individuals based on their religious beliefs. And we know that Bill 21 has perpetuated systemic discrimination and hindered the fundamental rights and freedoms of countless religious minorities across the province of Quebec, especially for Muslim women, Sikhs and Jews, and many racialized and newcomer communities. Unfortunately, the lower courts have said their hands are tied. That is why we are seeking clarity from the highest court in Canada. And this is a case that the Supreme Court of Canada, should hear. The issues raised in this case are so fundamentally important to democracy. They raise significant issues of national importance and concern. We are also here to send a clear and strong message to governments that seek to use the notwithstanding clause to infringe the rights of vulnerable and marginalized groups. The Charter is not just a piece of paper that can be ripped apart and shred without consequences. The Charter is premised on foundational democratic and legal principles at the heart of what makes us a just, equitable, and fair society. That is why we are committed to continuing this legal fight all the way up to the highest court in Canada, along with our litigation partners. And we need everyone who believes in the Charter, who believes in rights, and that rights matter to our democracy, to continue to voice their opposition to Bill 21. Thank you very much.
Alors, si on a besoin de on peut prendre des questions maintenant. We can take questions now.
Moi, j'ai peut-être une question. Je comprends qu'au centre de cette contestation-là, évidemment, c'est l'utilisation de la clause dérogatoire.
Ouais.
Et là, Pierre Poilievre, hier, nous dit que justement, la clause dérogatoire, même le fédéral pourrait l'utiliser à l'avenir. Est-ce que vous seriez en faveur
La vraie question, c'est pas... Le problème qu'on a devant nous, c'est la façon dont la clause de non-obstant est utilisée. La question remonte vraiment, est-ce que ce soit le gouvernement provincial ou fédéral, peut simplement enlever les droits des personnes parce que c'est populaire ou politiquement opportun? Vraiment, ce qu'on a commencé avec la loi 21, c'est une situation où que plusieurs gouvernements provinciaux ont commencé à passer des lois pour enlever les droits à des citoyens simplement parce que c'est politiquement opportun. Alors, une journée, est-ce qu'on veut habiter dans un pays où on pourrait imposer une religion nationale? Est-ce qu'on voudrait habiter dans un pays où c'est illégal de se syndiquer? Est-ce qu'on voudrait habiter dans un pays où que le gouvernement peut aller chercher n'importe quoi qu'il veut dans ta maison? Alors, la question, c'est comment l'utiliser de la bonne façon? Et le précédent qui a été créé par la loi 21, c'est un précédent terrible. Alors, nous autres, on pense que les Canadiennes et les Canadiens ont le droit de comprendre que leurs droits ne peuvent pas être retirés quand bon leur semble. On ne devrait pas mettre autant de confiance dans nos politiciens et les politiciennes. Ouais.
Moi, j'utiliserais cette loi-là pour, par exemple, dans les cas de meurtres multiples. Et là, on pense évidemment à cette cause d'Alexandre de de la mosquée à Québec. Est-ce que dans des cas comme ça, pour ramener des lois comme ça, vous seriez en faveur de l'utilisation de la clause dérogatoire?
Non. La réalité, c'est que nous autres, on habite dans un pays de droit. Dans un pays de droit. Et c'est aux tribunaux de statuer sur les questions de droit. C'est pas aux politiciens d'aller s'émincer dans des questions juridiques. Les politiciens ont leur responsabilité, leur devoir à la société, mais le cadre juridique aussi a leur propre responsabilité. Et quand la politique commence à s'émincer dans les questions juridiques, on voit des abus graves. Parce qu'une journée, ça pourrait être quelque chose qu'une partie de la population est en d'accord avec, et l'autre journée, ça serait complètement l'opposé. On a un système de loi, we have common law, on a des précédents jurisprudentiels. Et c'est important de suivre ça pour que la justice existe réellement dans notre pays. Ouais. Does anybody else have questions? D'autres questions? Non? OK. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Oh, did she leave her phone?
Huh? Yeah, this is Yasser's phone.
Okay.